My name is Steven, and do you seek truth? Because if so, I would like to read to you A New Earth Project by Eckhart Tolle. To me, it's like reading the never-ending story. It's almost an interface of its own. So I'm going to skip around in this because a lot of it is built up. So I'm just going to read you some excerpts. A new heaven and a new earth. The flowering of human consciousness. The inspiration for the title of this book came from a Bible prophecy that seems more applicable now than any other time in human history. It occurs in both the Old and the New Testament and speaks of the collapse of the existing world order and the arising of a new heaven and a new earth. We need to understand here that heaven is not a location, but refers to the inner realm of consciousness. This is an esoteric meaning of the word, and this is also its meaning in the teachings of Jesus. Earth, on the other hand, is the outer manifestation of form, in which is always a reflection of the inner world. Collective human consciousness and life in our planet are intrinsically connected. A new heaven is the emergence of a transformed state of human consciousness. And a new earth is its reflection in the physical realm. Since human life and human consciousness are intrinsically one with the life of the planet, as the old consciousness dissolves, there are bound to be synchronistic, geographic, and climatic natural upheavals in many parts of the planet, some of which are already witnessing now. Now, isn't that crazy? This book was written, I want to say it was 15, 20 years ago. And I'll look that up in a bit. So, the ego, the current state of humanity. Words, no matter whether they are vocalized and made into sound or remain unspoken as thoughts, can cast an almost hypnotic spell upon you. You easily lose yourself in them. You become hypnotized into implicity, believing that when you have attached a word to something, you know what it is. The fact is, you don't know what it is. You have only covered up the mystery with a label. Everything, a bird, a tree, even a simple stone, and certainly a human being, is ultimately unknowable. This is because it has unfathomable depth. All we can perceive, experience, think about is the surface layer of reality, less than the tip of an iceberg. Underneath the surface appearance, everything is not only connected with everything else, but also with the source of all life, out of which it came. Even a stone, and more easily a flower or a bird, could show you the way back to God, to the source, to yourself. When you look at it or hold it and let it be without imposing a word or mental label on it, in a sense of awe, of wonder arises within you. Its essence silently communicates itself to you and reflects your own essence back to you. This is what great artists sense and succeed in conveying in their art. Van Gogh didn't say, just an old chair. He looked and he looked and looked. He sensed the beingness of the chair. Then he sat in front of the canvas and took up the brush. The chair itself would have sold for the equivalent of a few dollars. that the painting of that same chair today would fetch in excess of 25 million. When you don't cover up the world with words and labels, a sense of miraculous returns to your life that was lost a long time ago. When humanity, instead of using thought, became possessed by thought, a depth returns to your life. Things regain their newness, their freshness, and the greatest miracle is the experiencing of your essential self, as prior to any words, thoughts, or mental labels and images. For this happens, you need to disentangle your sense of I, of beingness, from all things. It has become mixed up with, that is to say, identified with, the disentanglement that is what this book is all about. The quicker you are attaching verbal or mental labels to things, people, or situations, the more shallow and lifeless your reality becomes. And the more deadened you become to reality, the miracle of life that continuously unfolds within and around you in this way, cleverness must be gained, but wisdom is lost. And so are joy, love, creativity, and aliveness. They are concealed in the still gap between the perception and the interpretation. Of course, we have to use words and thoughts. They have their own beauty, but do we need to become imprisoned by them? Words reduce reality to something the human mind can barely grasp, which isn't very much. Language consists of 5 basic sounds produced by the vocal cords. And they are the vowels A, E, I, O, U. The other sounds are consonants produced by air pressure, S, F, G, and so forth. Do you believe some combinations of such basic sounds could ever explain who you are? Or the ultimate purpose of the universe, or even what a tree or a stone is in its depths? The word I embodies the greatest error of the deepest truth, depending on how it's used. In conventional usage, it is not only one of the most frequently used words in language, together with the related words me, my, mine, and myself, but also one of the most misleading. In normal everyday usage, I embodies the primordial error, a misconception of who you are, an illusory sense of identity. This is ego. The illusory sense of self is what Albert Einstein, who had deep insight not only onto the reality of space and time, but also into human nature, referred to as an optical illusion of the consciousness. That illusory self then becomes the basis for all further interpretations, or rather misinterpretations of reality. All thought processes, interactions, and relationships, your reality becomes a reflection of the original illusion. The good news is, if you can recognize illusion as illusion, it dissolves. The recognition of illusion is also its ending. Its survival depends on your mistaking it for reality. In the seeing of who you are not, the reality of who you are emerges by itself. This is what happens when you slowly and carefully read this in the next chapter, which are about the mechanics of the false self. We call the ego. So what is nature of the illusory self? When you usually refer to when you say I is not who you are by a monstrous act of reductionism, the infinite depths of who you are is confused with the sound produced by the vocal cords or the thought of I. In your mind, and whatever the I has identified with. So what do the usual I and the related me, mine, my, or mine refer to? When a young child learns the sequence of sound produced by the parent's vocal cords in his or her name, the child begins to equate a word, in which the mind becomes a thought. And those who he or she is at that stage, some children refer to themselves in third person. Johnny is hungry. Soon after they learn the magic word I and equate it with their name, which they have already equated with who they are. The other thoughts come and merge with the original I thought. And the next steps are thoughts of me and mine to designate things, Maya, that are somehow part of I. This identification with objects, which means investing things, but ultimately thoughts that represent things with a sense of self, thereby deriving a false identity from them. When my toy breaks or is taken away, intense suffering arises. Not because of any intrinsic value to the toy, as the child will soon lose interest in it, and it will be replaced by other toys, other objects. But because of the thoughts of mine, the toy became part of the child's developing sense of the I. And so, as the child grows, the original I thought attracts other thoughts to itself. It becomes identified with a gender, possessions, the sense-perceived body, a nationality, a race, a religion, a profession, other things the I identifies with are roles, mother, father, husband, wife, and so on. Accumulated knowledge or opinions, likes and dislikes, and also things that happen to be me in the past, the memory of which are thoughts, and further define my sense of self as me and my story. These are only some of the things people derive from their sense of identity form. They are ultimately no more than thoughts held together precariously by the fact that they are all invested with a sense of self. The mental construct that is what you normally refer to when you say I. To be more precise, most of the time is not you who speaks when you say or think I, but some aspect of the mental construct, the ego itself. Once you awaken, you still use the word I, but it will come from a much deeper place within yourself. Most people are still completely identified with the incessant stream of mind, of compulsive thinking, most of it repetitive and pointless. There is no I apart from their process and their emotions that go with them. This is the meaning of being spiritually unconscious. When told that there is a voice in their head that never stops speaking, they say, "What voice? What?" Or angrily deny it. Which, of course, is the voice, is the thinker, is the unobserved mind. It can almost be looked upon as the entity that has taken possession of them. Some people never forget the first time they disidentified from their thoughts and thus briefly experienced the shift in identity from being the content of their mind to bring the awareness in the background. For others, it happens to be in such a subtle way they hardly notice it, or they just notice an influx of joy or inner peace without knowing the reason. The first glimpse of awareness came to me when I was a first-year student in the University of London. We're going to skip this part because it's a story about him and Stephen Hawking. It's really good, but let's get to the point, right? Identification with the body. Apart from objects, another basic form of identification with the body, firstly, is the body male or female. And so, the sense of being a man or woman takes up a significant part of most people's sense of self. Gender becomes identity. Identification with gender is encouraged at an early age, and it forces you into a role, into conditioned patterns of behavior that affect all aspects of your life, not just sexuality. It is a role that many people become completely trapped in. Even more so in some of the traditional societies than in Western culture, where identification with gender beginning to lessen somewhat. In some traditional cultures, the worst fate a man or woman can have is to be unwed or barren, and for a man to lack sexual potency and not be able to produce children. Life's fulfillment is perceived by the fulfillment of one's gender identity. In the West, it is the physical appearance of the body that contributes greatly to the sense of who you think you are. Its strength or weaknesses, its perceived beauty or ugliness are relative to others. For many people, the sense of self-worth is intimately bound up in their physical strength, good looks, fitness, and external appearance. Many feel a diminished sense of self-worth because they perceive their body as ugly or imperfect. Now, I know you've all been through that. I've met hundreds of people that they don't have this worthiness inside them. In some cases, the mental images of concepts of my body is a complete distortion of reality. A young woman may think herself as overweight and therefore starve herself, when in fact she is quite thin. Y'all know about that one, right? She can't see her body anymore. All she sees is the mental concept of her body, which says, I am fat. Or, I will become fat. At the root of this condition lies identification with the mind. As people have become more and more mind identified, which is the intensification of egoic dysfunction, there has also been dramatic increases in the incidence of anorexia in recent decades. If the sufferer could look at her body without interfering judgments of her mind, or even recognize those judgments for what they are instead of believing in them. Lost my place there. All right. Or better still, if she could feel her body from within, this would initiate her healing. So see, if you could see the person you are inside you, the healing will begin. And when you don't let labels or expectations of the world around you build up who you think you're supposed to be because of them. And that's another great illusion that I believe we face as a society, that we see beauty and we want to replicate it, and the artificial construct that we're replicating is absolutely impossible. So we immediately tear down our self-worth, when the truth is we are the reason that beauty is being shown to us. It's a trifecta of the universe, the beauty, and the receiver, all having a perfect place in nature. Those who are identified with their good looks, you know, like when you're a bald guy with a speech impediment, you're in there, baby. Physical strength or abilities experience suffering when those attributes begin to fade or disappear. I know too much about that one. In our 20s, I started going bald. Around 22, I started shaving our head, and you know, it was a hard thing to go through in your 20s. So I totally understand what that's about. Their very identity was based on them and the threatened with collapse. In either case, ugly or beautiful, people derive a significant part of their identity, be it negative or positive, from their body. To be more precise, they derive their identity from the I thought that they erroneously attach to the mental image or concept of their body, which after all is no more than a physical form that shares the destiny of all forms. That's one of my favorite parts. You know, no matter what, male energy, female energy, form, unformed, we're all going to the same destination. We all, it doesn't matter if you're God, a demigod, a human being, the Ringling Brothers Circus, man, woman, juggernaut, Ethiopian, Mexican, American, we're all going to the same place. We're all going to the same place. Impermanence and ultimate decay, equating the physical sense perceived body that is destined to grow old, wither and die with the eye, always leads to suffering sooner or later. To refrain from identifying with the body doesn't mean that you neglect, despise, or no longer care for it. If it is strong, beautiful, or vigorous, you can enjoy and appreciate those attributes while they last. You can also improve the body's condition through right nutrition and exercise. And if you don't equate the body with who you are, when beauty fades, vigor diminishes, or the body becomes incapacitated. This will not affect your sense of worth or identity in that way. In fact, the body begins to weaken. The formless diminish, and the light of consciousness can shine more easily through the fading form. It is not just people with good or near perfect bodies who are likely to equate it with who they are. You can just as easily identify with a problematic body and make the body's imperfections, illness, or disability into your identity. And that is where the dangers lie, I believe, in black magic. It's not just... You may then think or speak of yourself as a sufferer of this or that chronic illness or disability. You receive a great deal of attention from doctors and others who constantly confirm to you your conceptual identity as a sufferer or a patient. You then unconditionally cling to the illness because it has become the most important part of who you perceive yourself to be. I know a lot of people may not understand this. I do too well. Fighting disease is something you can't do. You can't identify with the fight. You can't identify with the disease. It has to be almost completely ignored, except for basic management. Like if you have diabetes, don't ignore the fact that you're going to pound sugar down your face. But if you have something seriously wrong with you, and it becomes your life, it's very hard to let that go. And once the ego has found an identity, it does not want to let it go. The very next line. Amazingly, but not infrequently, the ego, in search of a stronger identity, can and does create illness in order to strengthen itself through them. Isn't that crazy? So it's like you're a body, you're the mind, ego, and you're the spirit all at the same time. Once again, the trifecta of it all is always relevant and prevalent. Let's see here. I had a really good spark. Here's a good one. Complaining and resentment. Complaining is one of the ego's favorite strategies for strengthening itself. Every complaint is a little story the mind makes up that you completely believe in. Whether you complain aloud or only in thought makes no difference. Some egos that perhaps don't have much else to identify with easily survive on complaining alone. I'm going to reread that. Whether you complain aloud or only in thought makes no difference. Some egos that perhaps don't have much else to identify with easily survive on complaining alone. When you are in the grip of such an ego, complaining, especially about other people, is habitual. And of course, unconscious, which means you don't know what you're doing. Applying negative mental labels to people, either to their face, or more commonly when you speak about them to others, or even just think about them, is often a part of a pattern Name calling is the crudest form of such labeling. And the egos need to be right and triumphant over others. Jerk, bastard, bitch, all definitive pronouncements that you can't argue with. On the next level, down the scale of unconsciousness, you have shouting and screaming. And not much below that is physical violence. So it's kind of like the emotional guidance scale, but in this case, it's the emotional unconscious to conscious scale. Consciousness, unconsciousness. So below below screaming and fighting is physical violence. Resentment is the emotion that goes with complaining and the mental labeling of people and adds even more energy to the ego. Resentment means to feel better. Indignant, aggrieved, or offended. Resentment means to feel bitter. Indignant, aggrieved, or offended. But you resent other people's greed, their dishonesty, their lack of integrity. What are they doing? What did they do? What they did in the past, what they said, what they failed to do, what they should or shouldn't have done. The ego loves it. Instead of overlooking unconsciousness in others, you make it into their identity. Now I'm going to read that again because that was powerful. The ego loves it. Instead of overlooking unconsciousness in others, you make it into their identity. Who is doing that? The unconscious in you, the ego. Sometimes the fault that you perceive in another isn't even there. It is a total misinterpretation, a projection by a mind condition to see enemies. Yeah, that one needs to be reread. At other times, the fault may be there, but by focusing on it, sometimes to the exclusion of everything else, you amplify it, and what you react to in another, you strengthen in yourself. Non-reaction to the ego in others is one of the most effective ways, not only of going beyond ego in yourself, but also of dissolving the collective human ego. But you can only be in a state of non-reaction if you can recognize someone's behavior as coming from the ego. And I'm going to stop right there for a second. That is the best part about tarot. This is why we learn tarot. That's why I wanted to design an interface was so that you could see it coming. It's divination. We know what's coming towards us with divination, and that's the point. But when you take divination and you turn it into enemies, or you turn divination into any negative type of expansion, you're actually the one that's unconscious. So that's really important to know, like who's in charge, your ego, or your consciousness, or your unconsciousness. See, your unconsciousness and your ego are working together. They have to have each other to do their thing. And when you realize it's not personal, there is no longer a compulsion to react as if it were. By not reacting to the ego, you will often be able to bring out the sanity in others, which is unconditioned consciousness as opposed to the conditioned. At times, you will have to take practical steps to protect yourself from deeply unconscious people. This you can do without making them into enemies. I repeat, this you can do without making them into enemies, because you're just creating enemies in your mind and in your speech, and then you're riddling the world with this enemies idea, which is an egregori. You see, the egregori need this negative form to proceed. That's why ego and egregori are so similar. They're the same thing. I believe the egregori are when an ego actually gets to disattach from the body. It disattaches from the body. And then it goes and finds another one, because the original body became so pure It didn't need, it released it. It released that energy. Your greatest protection, however, is being conscious. Somebody becomes an enemy if you personalize the unconscious. That is the ego. I repeat, somebody becomes an enemy if you personalize the unconscious. That is the ego. See, you have to put the enemy into the enemy. You have to put it, or you let someone else put it there for you, which is mostly the case. A lot of people profit from doom speak, I like to call it, and that's all I see. That's all I see with tarot readers. That's all I see with religious institutions. All I see is doom speak, doom speak, doom speak, and then collection. And you know, it is the way it is. That's the world stage. There's nothing I or anyone else can do anything about it. We all have a right to be free and have our free will. And that was one of the biggest lessons I had to learn, was to not try to enforce God's will, because his will was to let these tarot card readers and all these people tell you about enemies and tell you about how there's deception in your life, because the devils have to be exposed. It's really that simple. And a lot of them are such good people, and I don't think they realize that they're practicing black magic. The ego loves to complain and feel resentful, not only about other people, but also about situations. When you can do to a person, you can also do to a situation. Make it into the enemy. The implication is always, this should not be happening. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be doing this. I'm being treated unfairly. And the ego's greatest enemy of all, of course, is the present moment, which is to say, life itself. See, and that's another thing about the past and future idealization. You're taking away from the current present, which truly makes them ruminate. You can only ruminate. You can't think of the future without thinking of it, without it already being in the past. And you'll never be able to drag up anything but now, from now. I don't care how you think you're going to do it. It can only come from right now. All life comes from now, and only now, and forever now. There will be now. Is all we're ever going to have. Now is all we will ever have. Now you can spend 2,000 years thinking about 2,000 years ago. You know how many nows that is missed? Complaining is not to be confused with informing someone of a mistake or deficiency so they can be put right. And to refrain from complaining doesn't necessarily mean putting up with bad quality or behavior. There is no ego in telling the waiter that your soup is cold, which is always neutral. How dare you serve me cold soup? That's complaining. There is a me here that loves to feel personally offended by the cold soup. You see what I mean? So this is a big key. When sound from your voice is unconsciously in inertia, and you're interacting with people, and you use those keywords, me, mine, and if there is a negativity attached to it, then it's 100% unconscious ego. Now, it's almost impossible in the English language to not use me, mine in some form or another. Even when I started this video, I said, my name is Stephen. I'm identifying with the body. But see, that's kind of from a factual state. My name is Stephen. I am Stephen. You see? But only to the point to where I get to identify with the label you can put on me to feel comfortable enough with actually interacting and approaching and seeing that I am another human being just like you, right? So if you stick to the facts, let's see, actually, we're going to finish the page. A me that enjoys making someone wrong. The complaining we are talking about is the service of the ego, not of change. Sometimes it becomes obvious that the ego doesn't really want to change, so it can go on complaining. So if you can catch, that is to say, notice the voice in the head, perhaps in that very moment it complains about something and recognizes it for what it is, the voice of the ego, no more than a conditioned mind pattern. You see, you're not your thoughts. You're not your thoughts. And I can prove that right now. This great little technique that we came up with years ago. If you repeat after me, in your mind, not aloud, love, 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 love. Now stop. Did you repeat love in your mind? Now, did I control your thoughts? No, I didn't. You see, you spoke love in your mind because you gave me permission to repeat after me. So you spoke love in your mind. I didn't force it there. You see, you're not your thoughts. You are the observer of the thoughts. You're the releaser of the experiences. Whereas resentment is often an emotion that goes with complaining. It may be accompanied by a stronger emotion such as anger or some other forms of upset. In this way, it becomes more highly energetic. And complaining then turns into reactivity, another form of the ego's way of strengthening itself. There may be many people who are always waiting for the next thing to react against, to feel annoyed or disturbed about, and it takes long before they find it. This is an outrage, they say. How dare you? I resent this. They are addicted to upset and anger as others are to a drug. Through reacting against this, or that they assert and strengthen their feeling of self. A long-standing resentment is called a grievance. To carry a grievance, my mama always called that holding a grudge. To carry a grievance is to be in a permanent state of against. And that is why grievances constitute a significant part of many people's ego. Collective grievances can survive for centuries in the psyche of a nation or tribe and fuel a never-ending cycle of violence. A grievance is a strong negation, negative emotion connected to an event and sometimes distant past that is being kept alive by compulsive thinking, by retelling the story in that head out or loud of what someone did to me or what someone did to us. A grievance will also contaminate other areas of your life. For example, why you think about and feel your grievance, it's a negative emotional energy that can distort your perception of an event that is happening in the present, or influence the way in which you speak or behave towards someone in the present. One strong grievance is enough to contaminate a large area of your life and keep you in the grip of the ego. It requires honesty to see whether you still harbor grievances. Whether there is someone in your life that is not completely forgiven, an enemy, if you do, become aware of the grievance, both on the level of thought as well as emotion. That is to say, to be aware of the thought, to keep it alive, and to feel the emotion as the body's response to those thoughts. Don't try and let go of those grievances. Trying to let go, to forgive, does not work. Forgiveness happens naturally. You see, you can't try to do it. It just happens naturally. I call that the passage of time. Time heals all things. And when you see that it has no purpose other than to strengthen a false sense of self, to keep the ego in place, to seeing is freeing. Jesus' teaching to forgive enemies is essentially about the undoing of one of the main egoic structures in humankind. The past has no power to stop you from being present now. Only your grievance about the past can do that. And what is a grievance? the baggage of an old thought or emotion. I'm going to stop there for now. I got to go take a little break of refreshment. Thank you guys very much. I plan on reading more as soon as possible. Have a blessed day.